contact with the Beach Boys at all these days?
Not at all. No, I don't like Mike Love at all because I don't like his attitude is too egotistical.
The story of the Beach Boys is one of America's most beloved bands. But it's also the story of one of rock music's most painful feuds. Brian Wilson and Mike Love, two cousins who helped create the soundtrack of California Dreaming, ended up in a decades-long battle that would tear apart their family and their band. In 1961, the quiet California suburb of Hawthorne, 5 young men came together to form what would become the Beach Boys. Brian Wilson was the shy, but incredibly talented teenager at the center of it all. He loved creating harmonies and writing songs. With him were his younger brothers Dennis and Carl Wilson, their cousin Mike Love, and Brian's friend Al Jardine. They weren't thinking about fame when they started. They just wanted to make music. Together, Dennis was the only one who actually surfed, and he suggested they write a song about it. Brian and Mike worked together to create their first single called Surfing in late 1961. The song became a surprise hit in their local area and eventually made it onto national music charts. This early success led to a record deal with Capitol Records in 1962, and things started moving very quickly for the young band. Their early music was simple and fun. They wrote catchy songs about surfing, cars, and teenage life in California. Songs like Surfing Safari and Surfing USA captured what young people across America were feeling. Brian would usually come up with the melodies and musical arrangements, while Mike helped write the lyrics and brought his own special vocal style to the songs. This partnership worked well in the beginning, and their blend of Brian's musical creativity and Mike's understanding of what teenagers wanted to hear made them very successful. By 1964, the Beach Boys had become one of the most popular bands in America. They had hit after hit and had built their reputation around the fun, sunny California lifestyle. But success came with pressure, and Brian was feeling it more than anyone else. He was responsible for writing the songs, arranging all the vocal harmonies, and producing their records. The constant touring, writing, and recording was wearing him down. He started having panic attacks and his mental health began to suffer. In December 1964, during a flight to a concert, Brian had a complete breakdown. He decided he couldn't continue touring with the band. The other members supported his decision, and they brought in other musicians to fill his spot during live performances. First, Glenn Campbell helped out temporarily. Then Bruce Johnston joined permanently to play bass and sing Brian's parts on stage. While Brian stopped touring, he threw himself completely into studio work. Being away from the road gave him the space to focus entirely on making music. He started writing songs that were more personal and emotional, moving away from the simple beach and car themes that had made them famous. Albums like The Beach Boys Today and Summer Days showed this change clearly. The music became more thoughtful, with richer arrangements and deeper lyrics, to create these new sounds. Brian began working with a group of top session musicians. In Los Angeles, known as the Wrecking Crew, these were highly skilled professional musicians who had worked on many hit records. Brian would use them to record the instrumental tracks for Beach Boys songs, and then the band members would come in later to add their vocals. This gave Brian much more control over the final sound of their music. Brian's songs became more layered and musically complex. He experimented with unusual instruments, strange chord progressions, and intricate vocal harmonies. While Brian was growing as an artist, not everyone in the band was happy with these changes. Mike Love, in particular, was becoming uncomfortable with the new direction. He had always focused on what fans wanted and what would sell records. Mike believed the band's strength came from their feel-good, easy-to-understand songs. He worried that Brian's new experimental approach might be too strange or too serious for their audience. Songs like Please Let Me Wonder and Let 'Em Run Wild were more emotional and didn't fit the usual Beach Boys image that fans expected. Behind the scenes, disagreements between Brian and Mike started happening more often. Brian wanted to push the band into new artistic territory, while Mike wanted to keep things simple and familiar. Their visions for where the band should go were starting to drift apart. Mike couldn't understand why Brian was changing a formula that had worked so well for them. Brian, on the other hand, was tired of writing the same kinds of songs over and over again. He wanted to be taken seriously as an artist and composer. By 1966, Brian was completely focused on his studio work, while the rest of the Beach Boys continued touring. He had big plans for their next album. He didn't just want to make another Beach Boys record. He wanted to create something special, something deeper and more emotional than anything they had ever done before. That album would become Pet Sounds. Brian worked on Pet Sounds mostly by himself. He wrote the music, arranged all the songs, and produced the entire record. He worked closely with a lyricist named Tony Asher, who helped Brian turn his thoughts and feelings into words. The songs they created weren't about surfing or cars anymore. Instead, they were about growing up, falling in love, feeling lost, and trying to find your place in the world. Songs like Wouldn't It Be Nice? God Only Knows. And I just wasn't made for these times were thoughtful, emotional, and very personal. Mike Love wasn't much involved in making Pet Sounds because the band was touring while Brian was in the studio. Mike only heard most of the songs after they were already finished. When he finally listened to the album, he had strong negative reactions. Didn't like the direction Brian was taking the group. Reportedly called the album Brian's Ego Music because he felt it was more about Brian's personal artistic vision than about what their fans actually wanted to hear. One song caused particular tension between them. Hang On to Your Ego had lyrics that were influenced by Brian's experimentation with drugs. Mike didn't like the lyrics at all and pushed Brian to change them. Eventually, Brian rewrote the song and changed the title to I Know There's an Answer. But this disagreement showed how far apart Brian and Mike had grown in their ideas about what the band's music should be. When Pet Sounds was released in May 1966, it received incredible praise from music critics and fellow musicians. Many people in the music world saw it as a groundbreaking album. The arrangements were complex, the lyrics were honest, and the harmonies were beautiful. Paul McCartney later said Pet Sounds was one of his favorite albums ever made. However, the American public had a mixed reaction. The album didn't sell. As well as their earlier records, confused some fans who expected the usual fun and upbeat Beach Boys sound they knew and loved. For Mike, it seemed to prove his point. He believed the album was too far removed from what people wanted from the Beach Boys. Brian, however, was heartbroken that his most personal and artistic work wasn't fully embraced by fans. Despite this setback, Brian wasn't finished pushing creative boundaries after Pet Sounds. He began work on what would become one of the most famous singles in pop music history, Good Vibrations. Good Vibrations was completely different from any song the Beach Boys had ever made. Brian spent months recording it in pieces, trying out different instruments, vocal parts, and sound effects. He worked in multiple studios and used the Wrecking Crew musicians to create the backing tracks. The final song included unusual sounds like a theremin, which gave it a strange and exciting feel. The recording process was long and expensive, costing around $50,000, which was a huge amount of money at that time. Mike and other band members started to worry about Brian's methods. They questioned the costs, the time being spent, and the complicated recording sessions. While Mike was impressed by the final result, Brian's way of working seemed excessive and risky to him. Mike also worried that fans wouldn't understand such an unusual song. But when Good Vibrations was finally released in October 1966, it became a massive hit, reaching #1 on the charts and proving that Brian's creative vision could still lead to commercial success. Inspired by this success, Brian began working on an even more ambitious project called Smile. This was meant to be a groundbreaking album that would prove the Beach Boys could stand alongside the most creative artists of their time. Brian brought in lyricist Van Dyke Parks to help with the words, hoping Parks could match his musical ideas. With equally imaginative lyrics, from the beginning, Smile was unlike anything the Beach Boys had ever attempted. Brian was experimenting with unusual song structures, strange sound effects, and complex vocal arrangements. He was building songs in small pieces, recording different sections separately and planning to connect them later. Songs like Surf's Up, Heroes and Villains, and Cabanescence showed how far Brian was willing to go in exploring new sounds and ideas, but Mike Love was becoming increasingly concerned about this direction. He didn't understand the abstract, lyrics Van Dyke Parks was writing. Some of the songs had words that didn't seem to make much sense, at least not in a clear storytelling way. During one famous recording session for Cabin Essence, Mike reportedly turned to Van Dyke Parks and demanded to know what a particular line meant. When Parks didn't respond, the tension in the room became obvious to everyone present. Mike's reaction wasn't just about the lyrics. He was worried about the overall direction the band was taking. He felt Brian was making music that was too strange, too risky, too far removed from what had made the Beach Boys successful. Mike was also upset that Brian wasn't including him in the creative process the way he used to. The partnership they once had, where Brian wrote the music and Mike helped shape the lyrics and themes, was falling apart. The recording sessions for Smile dragged on for months. Brian kept changing the structure of songs, re-recording parts, and losing confidence in his work. He was under pressure from the record label, from his bandmates, and from himself. The more criticism he faced, especially from Mike, the more Brian withdrew. His mental health, which was already fragile, began to decline even further. He started feeling isolated and paranoid, unsure of who he could trust. By mid-1967, Brian gave up on Smile completely. He shelved the entire project. To fill the gap, the band quickly recorded a much simpler album using some of the leftover ideas from Smile. This new album, called Smiley Smile, was stripped down and much more basic than what Brian had originally envisioned. After Smile collapsed, Brian began pulling away from the band more and more, stopped going to recording sessions regularly, avoided band meetings, and gave up much of his leadership role. The trust that had once existed between Brian and Mike, built during the band's early successful years, was now badly damaged. They were no longer working as a team, and as Brian faded into the background, Mike stepped forward to take more control, which only added to the growing conflict between them. The legal battles and personal conflicts between Brian Wilson and Mike Love would continue for decades, affecting not just their relationship, but the entire legacy of the Beach Boys. Their story became one of the most famous feuds in rock history, showing how creative differences and personal tensions can destroy even the closest family bonds.